When Eric July finally decided that he was done with the mainstream comic book industry, that after years and years of them treating their audience and their customers like absolute garbage, he was going to go out there and create his own comic book publishing company, you knew that people were going to be upset about it. Whether it's because of the way that Eric July thinks, whether it's because of who he talks to, whether it's simply because they are addicted to the mainstream comic book industry and they need to protect it at all costs, you knew there'd be people mad. But now the haters are out in full force after this thing has been so incredibly successful in less than 10 days. It is already at $2.7 million. Even though the mainstream wanted to ignore it, they can't at this point. They can't possibly ignore something like this. And I talked about how it had been being ignored by most of the big media sites that are around in the comic book industry. I even made a video calling them out for not talking about it, calling out places like Comic Book, calling out places like Bleeding Fool for not addressing this. And don't you know it, not that long after, we get an article from Bleeding Cool, and it's just as disingenuous and salty as you could possibly imagine. Eric D. July gets 30,000 orders worth $2.5 million for, quote, non-woke comic. Post on July 18th by Rich Johnston. Eric D. July is a libertarian contributor to the conservative network Blaze TV, founded by Glenn Beck. It's funny that that is the first phrase that gets uttered. Not the fact that he's been a long-time comic book fan, that he's talked about comic books on his YouTube channel, Young Rippa59, for years and years and years. No, that's the first thing out of Rich Johnston's mouth, because that's all he cares about. And when he had a comic book to crowdfund, they were happy to highlight this to their readers and viewers and label it as non-woke, talking about this article from The Blaze. Puts woke Marvel and DC to shame. Woke is defined as being aware of injustice in society, especially, but not limited to, racism. Of course, that may have been the original definition of woke, but it's certainly changed in the same way that they're changing the definition of the word woman. You know, things like woke, those definitions tend to change over time, don't they? For instance, you used to get labeled a racist or a bigot or a homophobe or all these things, and it actually meant something. Nowadays, so many people who just can't handle living in society or in social media, they just use that as an insult to anybody that they disagree with. So yes, words do in fact change over time, which doesn't seem anything that most people would be opposed to, especially superhero comics, which would seem to be all about fighting injustice. But I guess, welcome to the internet. Comic book number 1, Isom, is to be written by July. Not to be written. It has been written. It's all done. It's been done. All the art's been done for quite some time. This is not a crowdfund. This is a pre-order for anybody that's confused about it. I know it may be confusing because it looks similar to pre-orders and stuff like that, but no, this is shipping in August. These are pre-orders for his book. It's not a crowdfund, and is intended to launch a new multi-book comic universe, the Rippaverse. Isom is described as telling the story of a superhero who has come out of retirement. This is all basically set up from, from what Eric, described it as, the summary, which sounds a bit like tackling injustice in society to me, a little snipe from Rich Johnston talking about the character of Isom. Either way, the non-woke label saw the story picked up by Fox News and the New York Post, which have helped spread the cry further, and the revenue, already in 6 figures, soon went into 7. Not exactly true. If you had done your fucking research, Rich Johnston, you would realize this is inaccurate. But I know you're a fat, lazy piece of shit, so I'll do it for you. Both the New York Post, anti-woke comic book defies cancel culture, earns $1.7 million in 4 days, and here on Fox News, $1.7 million in 4 days. Both of these things, right? It was already written after it was at 7 figures. It was at $1.7 million by the time it was published on Fox News and New York Post. So no, that is not true. It was already in the $1 million range. Almost 30,000 pre-orders worth over $2.5 million. That's a remarkable achievement for a new comic book property, no matter who promoted it. Though the price for a 96-page comic of 35 plus 10 shipping might seem a bit on the high side if it wasn't for virtue signaling possibilities. If Eric July wants to create a long-running collectible comic book universe, he might want to try to bring some economics of scale into play or risk bankrupting his followers. Even with today's comic book inflation, a 96-page superhero usually sells for $10 to $12. Well, those aren't selling. Those $10 to $12 ones aren't selling for the mainstream comic book industry right now. That's just a fucking fact. You don't have to look very hard to see that. And again, I don't know why Rich Johnston is presuming to try to lecture Eric July about anything. after what he's done. This is an incredible achievement. 30,000 orders, $2.7 million. Yet you're trying to tell him, well, it's obviously priced too high. $35, it might be a lot of money to some people, but again, there are people that go out and spend more than that at a movie theater. There were people like myself. It was nothing. Every single week, I would go out to the comic book shop and I'd get $50, $75, $100 sometimes, depending on the runs, worth the comic books each and every week. A lot of people have cut that out of their lives because of the garbage that Marvel and DC have been pushing. So yeah, I don't think he's gonna bankrupt anybody with that price point. Because Eric is indeed thinking long-term, he has a code of ethics for his publishing plans, which can be summed up as no multiverses, no time travel, and an official continuity timeline. Weird that you failed to mention something. I think you forgot. I think you forgot about something. The number one thing in the code of ethics, respect the customer. Isn't it ironic that Rich Johnston forgot to say that? I think that was very, very intentional, considering it's the very first one. You know these people don't care about that at all. Eric D. July also told The Blaze, I'm not in the business of lecturing people and telling people exactly how to live their lives, but there are universal truths that I will acknowledge, and I think that's what's sort of missing, because people have, unfortunately, definitely in comic books these days, put other stuff in the forefront, and telling a good story is secondary. We all understand that. We have seen that time and time again. That's why the mainstream is floundering right now. But Rich Johnston doesn't think so. This does seem to be in conflict. What is important, telling a good story or acknowledging universal truths? And if truths aren't universal, do they need to be acknowledged? Aren't they by nature already acknowledged? And if someone thinks those truths aren't universal and doesn't believe that, isn't calling something a universal truth, putting it in the forefront, lecturing? Questions I'd love to ask. Well, reportedly, Rich Johnston maybe sent him an email that was absolutely disrespectful as hell. No confirmation that that was his email yet, but it wouldn't be a surprise. The Blaze also refers to July, saying Rippaverse Comics will be a place where content creators, artists, writers, and anyone who feels alienated by big corporations can come and tell their stories without fear of censorship or judgment. There are a lot of creative people in our space and our line of thinking that support our value of liberty. No matter whether you're conservative, libertarian, or whatever, and they're just undiscovered. They're in hiding because they have to work against the old guard. He doesn't like the fact that he listed conservative, libertarian, and then whatever. He wanted him to specifically align it out. He even puts it here. I did get a flavor of, to paraphrase Blues Brothers, we have both kinds of politics here, conservative and libertarian. But there are many places outside of corporate control who publish comic books. No one's saying that he's the first person to do this. But that's, again, the words that Rich Johnston, the shit stain, are trying to put in Eric July's mouth, because he despises the fact that Eric July, someone who doesn't think like him, a black man who started his own comic book industry, is successful right now. There's a lot of questions to ask, and stumbling across this incidentally caused all manner of ructions. Running a crowdfunder or Kickstarter or Indiegogo gives some measure of assurity the pre-orders listed, but running a crowdfunder on your website does not. So there's no independent voice to state that you got the orders you say you do. So you make a headline out of it. How can it be verified? Literally questioning whether the numbers are real. Go to Eric July's Twitter. He's literally shown the back end of his website and all the orders that are coming in on his website. He's proven it to you. Just because you don't want to listen to it, just because you don't want to do the research, just because you want to shit on somebody for having a different opinion than you, Rich, because they're successful, well, that doesn't mean that it's not true. These people just cannot handle it. They are freaking out right now, being forced to finally cover this in these actual comic book industry news sites. They're forced to finally talk about it, and they do it in the most disrespectful way possible. But it really doesn't matter, because this campaign is already massively successful and is just going to continue to grow. Let me know what you think about this in the comments below. Smash the like button, subscribe to the channel, ring the bell for notifications, share this video out there, and I'll talk to you later. Thanks for watching, everyone, and a huge shout out to my patrons. I appreciate you guys so much. Want to follow me on Twitter or Instagram? Check out the description below. You'll find links to my P.O. box and my Patreon as well. And I'll talk to you guys later.